Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting the development of an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Yonason Goldson, and I'd like to introduce my guests. Mariah Edgington is a transformational mindset mentor, a registered nurse and author of Journey Will, You Are More Than Enough. Welcome, Mariah.
Thank you.
Dr. Margarita Guri, CSP, Certified Speaking Professional, also known as Dr. Red Shoe, misbehavior expert, is a licensed psychologist, author of Color Me Difficult, and my co-host on the Rabbi and the Shrink podcast. Welcome. And Dr. Adam Martin, also known as the Fit Pharmacist, works with leaders and organizations who want to break through adversity into innovation to become the best version of themselves. So thank you all for being with me. And here is today's ethical scenario. True story. I bumped into my neighbor, a doctor, one morning and asked him about a chronic problem that was flaring up. He suggested I tried a couple of over-the-counter products and schedule an appointment with him in his office a month later in case the over-the-counter medicines didn't help. I saw him again a couple of weeks later and told him that my symptoms had abated. In that case, he said I didn't need to come in to see him. He then asked me not to cancel my appointment. He assured me that I wouldn't be charged for missing the visit. However, his group required him to see a minimum number of patients each week. And if I kept my appointments scheduled, that would lighten his workload. His request put me in a quandary. Was it ethical of him to ask me not to cancel an appointment I no longer needed? If not, would it be ethical for me to become his conspirator in doing just that? So we have, by design, 3 medical professionals with us, and the floor is open. That means anybody can jump in.
I think it's a little bit complicated. There's some sketchiness here. The first question always for me is, what's the wisdom medically? Do they really know the current diagnosis? It's a chronic situation. He's apparently the doctor, but has had a flare. Is there something going on? Does he have the data he needs to even give a quick consult? Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. So that's one question. So whether it was medically wise, the liability medically is the same whether it's on the sidewalk or in an office. So legally, ethically, in terms of wisdom, the issue of a favor. Doing a favor, does it make you owe a favor? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. But if we're doing something medically, I do believe that asking someone to lie, when he could have just put it as a consult for that day, the day he had the sidewalk consultation, and not had to lie. I think lying is never good for your reputation, never good for the profession, never good for the relationship that you have with the patient. Absolutely never. Besides, then you have to remember all the lies, so it's just inconvenient. It's ugly and we don't do it. And the jails, I worked at a penitentiary as an instructor, the first college course I taught. The path to hell and a penitentiary is paved with good intentions. A lot of them were doing someone a favor, and then the cover up is often where they get you. So if you mess up, fess up. That's my saying. And don't lie, and certainly don't ask anyone to cover up for you. If a doctor asks you to cover up, I think you thank them for the advice and then you see another doctor. I think doing that is just the safest thing. And whether it's fraud or not, fraud light, fraud adjacent, it's yucky. And I think you don't do it. So that's my very first thought. I think that was 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I think those were brilliant doses of wisdom, Dr. Margarita, and I have to
you,
agree. Sir. Oh yeah, absolutely. I have to agree in that with that assessment, was it thorough enough? The recommendation, we don't know the context and depth of that, but as a pharmacist, whenever someone comes to the front counter, I've been practicing since 2012. there's a framework that we run through to ensure that what we're recommending is appropriate. So first thing, is this for you? Like, is you're coming to the pharmacist for a condition, or the doctor or whoever, you first have to make sure who it's for. Because oftentimes you'll ask and they're like, oh, it's for my neighbor. Well, do you know what medications they're on? Do they have any side effects? Do you know if there's any medical conditions? Because all too often when someone says, where's the ibuprofen, the Motrin, whatever it might be, you start running through those questions and you find out that they're on a medication that counteracts with that. Maybe they're on a blood thinner, or they have a stomach ulcer, and they don't know that that would inflate it or cause even more harm. And that's really our first stance, is cause no harm, which is the point of these questions. So with that, you have the first assessment, like, was that thorough enough? But to the point of the question and the quandary, it does kind of make that law of reciprocity, or feeling like you owe someone something, which really should not be in healthcare, because that's more of that goes in the lines of almost manipulation, depending on how you look at it and the leverage of the favor asked. But if someone's asking you clearly to fraudulent a schedule, that would put a red flag and really put us in a difficult situation, if you're the patient. So putting you, Yonason, in that spot. So I would ask, what is the reason that you're looking for this appointment not to be made? You said it was for a break. Well, is there a way that we can find a solution in the gray? So if it's the fact that he is overbooked and he needs a break, perhaps we can still give him that break he needs and requests by scheduling a lunch break instead of a fraudulent patient visit. What a concept. But perhaps that would be an option. The other thing too, if you want to still keep the appointment, and this is what we do with recommendations, even if it's over the counter, and to your point, whether it's in a clinic or a sidewalk, there's fortune in the follow-up. Because while the symptoms might have resolved, the underlying cause may still remain, which is why follow-up is so important. So if you do have the symptoms are gone and he says, keep it. Well, what if, say, like, if I keep it, I would like to get a follow-up just to make sure that everything's okay. Because while your recommendation helped, I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything that could be going on that I'm not medically trained to assess. So those are a couple different options that I would say to stay in integrity, because nothing's worth that cost, but to really follow through and honor his wish of having that appointment space retained, depending on what the need and real reason is.
Absolutely
Very
great
interesting.
points.
Thank you.
Totally agree with both of you. I would go also, since you guys have covered that, and I absolutely agree with that, I'm going to go toward the dilemma of, gosh, do I stay with this doctor, or do I switch doctors now? Because now it doesn't match my values. And that's where I'm going to come in on, because I know you guys covered the things that I was thinking of too. It's super important to find the baseline cause. So let's go to the doctor, find that baseline cause. Anyhow, keep that appointment to get that on the record, first of all. Secondly, that takes me to the, how comfortable do I feel with someone who has suggested something that I'm not really comfortable with? And so now I have the option. Do I go ahead and go into the office? First of all, I would keep that appointment and I would say I'm coming because I do want to get this on record in case you're out of town or something and I need treatment for this condition. Now we have it documented. The other thing is really have to dig deep and wonder, is this person someone who is just really on the edge of burnout or stressed? Is this person, the doctor, need assistance himself or herself? They have that potential. We all know how overworked clinics are. He just told us that he had his schedule full and they required him to see so many people. Is that a red flag that we should be tuning into? Because physician suicide is not unheard of. So we're looking at kind of different things here. Was he suggesting that we don't come to the appointment to protect his own mental health? Or is it deeper than that? Is it something that I can reach out and maybe help him? Like you said, Adam, with the suggestions of different things.
Thank you for that. What you've all done is you've framed this issue in very broad terms based on all the unknowns. And that is a critical factor when it comes into ethical decision making. Socrates told us, you don't know what you don't know. And someone of lesser stature, Donald Rumsfeld, coined the phrase "the known unknowns," which is actually somewhat insightful. So as the one non-medical expert here, this was a doctor I had seen. He is actually recognized as the #1 doctor in his field in our town. So he's familiar with me, familiar with my situation. My approach to medicine is always wait as long as possible and hope it's going to go away. And he's someone who is always available for people who need him, even in his off time. And he is a casual friend and a good neighbor. So, and then one more point, that when I scheduled the appointment, it was a legit appointment. Now what he's asking me to do is not to cancel it. Of course, we know that crimes of omission are still crimes. Does that rise to the scale, to the level of a fraudulent appointment? And then, of course, there's the point that you touched on, Mariah, that many doctors do feel that they're overloaded with the commitments that are placed on them because of so much of the medical bureaucracy. So do any of those factors temper the observations that you've made so far?
I think Mariah's comment is the most tempering one, and that's not something I had thought about, Mariah, so good for you. That is he in need of service? Has he, I think that if we're looking at why we misbehave, altruism is one, you want to help out. Another one is the various delicious temptations, greed, speed, laziness, haziness, George May had said, and I add craziness and pride.
Yes.
And then the vulnerabilities. And maybe he's feeling this pull to be everything for the community. And that's a lot of exhaustion. So it's possible that he needs some support. To me, that's mitigating. But without that mitigating factor, anyone who asks me to lie about something like that, I always wonder, what else are they lying about?
Yes.
I just can't. I can't go there. Even someone amazing can go into the dark side of the gray temporarily because the delicious temptations are eating at their good judgment.
Yes. And I think I echo that. And one of the things that is very humbling, which is humility, the opposite of pride, pride being the root of all sin, that really being that factor that how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you're doing something small and you're like, oh, well, it didn't matter, it was just this. Well, how do people define things vary widely? So when you look at something that you consider small and say it's just this, what you might consider small is what someone else might be considered to be like the big thing. For example, go and ask 10 people how they define love. Totally different. And what's the big root with relationship issues is we have different definitions that are not clearly communicated, because how you define something, the meaning you give to someone does not match your blueprint. And there is a disconnect because we all assume that everyone else thinks like we think and expect that they understand us. So when we have that disconnect because of lack of communication, lack of clarity, that can really cause a big discord. But when someone does do something like that, that they consider that's not too big, I wonder what else they consider is not too big. But then the real question is, back to Mariah's point, is what is the root cause of that? Because it might have started like a small little thing. It went unnoticed. No one got in trouble or hurt. So then it's how far can we take it? And that's a lot of times how the slide happens when we start compromising our integrity, our own standards. And before we know it, we're doing things that a year ago we never would have considered. But it's that small little slide, that step by step that gets us to there. And as we all know, how do you get to a mountain? It starts with one small step. How do you get to the pit? One small step, or you slip.
I do have another question, because are we missing just a little bit of this by not knowing what kind of credibility this person has in the past? Is this the start of that small step toward the pit, as you said, Adam, or has this been going on a long time? Have people been seeing a change? Does this kind of look like a pattern of somebody who's really starting to get on the negative side instead of being the holistic and positive person and helpful person? Or is it truly way out of character? Are you able to address that, Yonason?
Well, yeah, in two ways, really. It is somebody that I trust and respect and admire. And he is universally trusted and respected and admired. Um, and that the terms about going to the dark side, I think, Adam, you really spoke to that we all have different areas where we start making excuses for ourselves. And when we talk about the slippery slope, that's a real serious phenomenon, and it's absolutely true. But the other side of it is that we all do make compromises. I mean, none of us is a saint, except for a few saints. But yeah. So then the question always becomes, where do I make my compromises? Why am I making my compromises? To what degree are those compromises merely a symptom of being a human being? And at what point are they really compromising my integrity or my credibility?
Yeah.
Yes, I completely agree. And thank you, Mariah, for bringing it up, and Yonason for providing clarity on that, because I think this really comes to a heart posture. So looking at it as an outsider, do we approach it with to seek understanding, or do we seek it to condemn and say, oh, they're so wrong, because we don't know all the factors? So I think this comes in the point of sin too. A lot of people say, oh, sin is just doing the wrong thing. Really what it is, in my perspective, is it's seeking a legitimate need in an illegitimate way. So to Mariah's point, it could be that he is very burned out, and he knows the medical system and how it's so stacked against him, and he's not allowed to take a lunch break or any other factors that we might not be aware of. So in his mind and his perspective, the only way to meet that need of relief of a break is to seek it through a illegitimate need. In his perspective, it's not, because tit for tat, whatever you want to call it. But is that perhaps why? So finding that understanding of, he's clearly trying to do this to help you, to help him, but he's trying to do it to what end? To get relief, to get a break. So what is the legitimate need he's trying to satisfy? And is there an alternative that we can recommend to help get that met in a more ethical way that doesn't tarnish the relationship? Because I think that's the crux of what puts you in an ethical dilemma, Yonason, is you respect him, you admire him. So you don't want to do anything that tarnishes the relationship, but you also don't want to tarnish your own integrity. So I think if you come at it with that, like, what is the need? How can I give him an alternative? And then maybe have a question like, hey, that conversation we had a while back, like, are you okay? Like, are you stressed out? To Mariah's point, like really seeking to know, like, what is going on in his world that all the people that are relying on him might not have considered or asked him, that he might feel guilty about. Because in healthcare, I know a lot of times we feel like in order to help other people, if we help ourselves, it's selfish. And it's this badge of courage, like, oh, I care so much for my patients, I have to sacrifice my own well-being, which short term, every now and then that can happen. But when it becomes a pattern, that's where it can really lead to this step into the gray.
You know, you raised three issues that I'd like to really get into, and we won't have time for all of them in this section, I think, but in the next segment, certainly. One is that we talk about the demands placed by a system that may be unreasonable or overly burdensome. And I mean, I've certainly heard plenty of stories about the medical profession that doctors do find themselves having to meet benchmarks that leave them exhausted and burned out, and feeling that they're not giving their patients the kind of care they would like to. So if I'm trapped in an unethical system, is it unethical for me to bend the rules to do what I ought to be do to serve the people that I'm responsible for? That's one issue. Another is the relationship that you mentioned, that if someone else is not holding at my ethical standards, to what degree do I accommodate people that are just in a different place in terms of their values, if it's not something that is quantifiably wrong or evil, or it's where are we in those gray areas? And then the third point is the power of rationalization. If a doctor feels he's overwhelmed and he can't serve his patients, so here he might say, well, I served him outside the office, so that entitles me to free up some time inside the office. Is that just a rationalization, or is there some legitimacy to that?
Well, let's go back to the gray. So one of the questions is has there been harm? The Hippocratic oath, first do no harm. Well, there has been harm. Three kinds of harm. One is we don't know if there's a backlog of patients, so that a patient that needs to be seen won't get that appointment. So we don't know that. So we don't have that fact. Another is the harm of him not getting what he needs, but then the lying. He'd be lying when he doesn't have to lie. He can just put the if he needs credit, it may not be day by day, depending on how the quota goes. He's seeing him 2 weeks earlier, whenever that is. So I think we have to look at, is there harm? And yes, there's a potential for some great harm here. Some small harm has occurred, but how about that poor patient that can't be seen?
That does it. There are so many parts of this, so many moving parts, as they say. It's hard to get your mind around what is the main thought. And I go back to what you had asked. The doctor, asked you to do something that compromised your personal standards. So it makes you wonder what else is compromised. But have we considered going and keeping this appointment and talking to him in that little space, bringing him something that could help him, even if it's just something mental to think about? Have you considered, or how can I help you? What does that look like if we go and are we now no longer part of this conspiracy, or is this something that is beyond that we're kind of uncomfortable with, and we need to really look at our own values first before we keep in touch with this person? He sounds like he's a good person, been ethical to you before, but this is the first time you've had that quandary. And so where do you weigh in on that? So thought there.
I think we've really framed the issues involved here, and the balancing of professional standards, ethical standards, versus the sort of meta responsibilities that we may have. This doctor wants to serve a patient, or his patients in general, and is in a system that may make that more difficult for him. The trade-offs, if I'm doing something outside the office, can I take credit for that inside the office? And then the degree to which we can sort of take some creative license with the scheduling, with the bureaucracy, with the record keeping, if we feel that somehow justice is being served and people are being well treated. And then the ultimate question, which comes up a lot in these discussions, is the moment I start making ethical compromises, I am now putting myself in danger of making more ethical compromises, and perhaps more serious compromises that will spill over into other areas. So I think it's a good evaluation of the factors involved here. It is interesting for me that as a non-medical professional, I don't share many of or at least the degree of sensitivity to this issue that the three of you do. And that's another ethical element, to not make judgments about areas in which we lack expertise. I think that was the first word of the day in our podcast, Doctor. It was ultra-crepidarianism.
Yes, it was.
Which means to assert opinions in areas where one does not have knowledge or expertise. So I think that's a really fundamental ethical principle. So I'll ask each of you to give me a 1 minute summation of your final thoughts, if you would. Dr. Redshoe, will you go first, please?
Oh, I would say moral of the story, call your doctor, go see the appointment. That's it. I think if you want good care, make sure you're in a place to get good care. Care on the sly, on the sidewalk is not good for anyone. Go, pay, enjoy, then go and do something good for yourself. That's it.
Yeah, I'd say
Right. Oh, Adam, please.
Sure. So I'd say just make sure that you're in alignment with your doctor. So if there's something that comes up that breaks that trust, I call it blind trust. When patients come to us, physicians, pharmacists, you don't know them, but they're coming to you with blind trust, right? What you do with that will totally change the dynamic of that relationship. So right now there is an alteration. So you have to either make that choice to have that conversation and express that, see what was going on, or go through the methods that we used and establish that relationship. Is this something you want to continue, or do you need to find someone that is in align with your values, even though you still respect them? Once that trust is broken, it's very hard to repair that. So really looking at what that is and why you go to that doctor. You go to that doctor because you trust him or her, and you trust that he or she will provide that care to you. So if there's a breach in that trust, that will disrupt the care process.
Agree with that. And I believe that once we do cross that boundary of talking to somebody on the street, so to speak, that kind of eliminates that, oh gosh, I have to be seen in the office, but not really. And that's on ourselves. I always believe make an appointment, follow up, put it in the record. And if that continues with the questionable trust, after speaking with them directly about it, how are you? How can I help you? Is something else going on here? And I still feel uncomfortable, then I'd be looking for a different provider.
Well, thank you all. Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Margarita Gurry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adam Martin, and thank you, Mariah Eddington, for your insights. For those of you who are listening or watching, if you'd like to suggest an ethical scenario or dilemma for us to discuss, please go to my website, YonasonGoldson.com, use the contact box and submit a proposal. Perhaps we will take up your question or your issue. If you are a Grappling with a Gray member, you can use the community link to participate in follow-up Q&A session with our guests. And if you're not a member, please go to gwtg.live, gwtg.live. You can sign up for a free 30-day trial and enjoy member benefits. Please join us again for our next episode as our panel grapples with the gray.